The history of the modern nation of France is as rich as it is ancient. A complex tapestry of a Proto-Celtic population emerging from the Bronze Age, which would be infused with Roman influence, followed by the influx of Germanic tribes from the east. This would eventually give rise to the population group and demographic of the early nation. France would shape the history of the European continent and beyond for centuries, going on to found a sprawling global empire, upending the European monarchical model with its revolution, and producing great leaders such as Napoleon, who would help ensure French domination on home shores. In this series, we'll explore the rich history of France and how it became one of Europe's greatest civilizations. Join us as we travel from prehistoric times through to present day, beginning here with its earliest ancient history. Early pre-human settlement in the region of modern-day France can be dated to at least 1.5 million years ago by stone tools found across archaeological sites. The next link in the chain were the Neanderthals, who were in the region from around 350,000 years ago. Unlike the simplified caricatures built up during the Victorian era of a basic and dim-witted group, it's now known the Neanderthals operated in far more complex ways than first imagined. Here in the region, they would have practiced their artwork and early spiritual practices, likely hunting the big game abundant across the area. They did operate in smaller and less stratified social groups, though, which made them vulnerable to the often larger and more organized emerging groups of Homo sapiens. Entering from the region around 40,000 years ago, they would eventually replace the Neanderthals, although also intermixing and ensuring the survival of Neanderthal DNA. The next period of Homo sapiens dominance brings us into the era of prehistory, slightly more well documented. These people groups gave us the magnificent cave art found at examples such as Lascaux and Chauvet. Here, the thrill of the hunt is portrayed in vivid detail, all done by ancient artists by the light of flickering candles. Rich red ochre, charcoal, and manganese oxide used as color mixes across the cave walls. The hunting of large mammals such as European bison as well as deer was an integral part of their society. The cave art reflects this and shows a people whose lives were deeply intertwined with the game they hunted, and of which they possessed detailed anatomic knowledge. The exact reasons for these paintings remains a mystery though. Was it solely a record of the hunt for posterity? Or instead was it more spiritually oriented work? Groups were gradually becoming more organized, though still limited in size by a largely nomadic and hunting-based culture. Things continued this way through the Mesolithic period, which for parts of France encompassed the years of around 13,000 to 5,000 BC. Following this, there was another key advent in the form of agriculture, leading to a more settled farming-based society. This period, known as the Neolithic, spanned around 5,000 to 2,000 BC and led directly into a period now just at the fringes of recorded history. It involved pretty monumental pivots in a way society organized itself, marking a break with the majority of human prehistory prior to that point. Roving bands of adept hunter-gatherers gradually morphed into more settled groups organized around farming and the development of single sites of occupation. In turn, a key prerequisite for nation forming. The agricultural revolution of the Neolithic led directly into the next sweeping change to encompass the region, that of the Bronze Age. It was a fascinating and rich historical period in this part of Europe. More settled and agrarian societies meant greater populations could be supported. This, in turn, led to more complex social groups with increased labor specialization, giving rise to new uses of materials. One of the results of this was the emergence of the Bronze Age. The valuable new material was formed by mixing the metals copper and tin to create a new alloy. The stronger and more durable material allowed for increased efficiency across daily tasks, as well as improved military production capabilities. For example, the progression of metallurgy allowed for the proliferation of the bronze combat sword and armor. Undoubtedly, warring states would have made use of their new tools to do battle and secure resources, though we do not know of specifics from this period. By the time of the Late Bronze Age, around 1200 BC, and we likely have what can be identified as the first Proto-Celtic groups. Thought to be united by their common language, an offshoot of Indo-European, these groups began to develop a distinctive culture, part of a process which would eventually produce a French national identity. While there is some debate as to the exact origins of Celtic culture, many theorize it spread from its source in Central Europe westward to include Gaul, parts of Iberia, and the British Isles. Though another school of thought argues it in fact originated on the Atlantic coast and spread east, explaining why there are such early Celtic-type archaeological finds along Britain and Spain's west coast. Regardless, by around 1000 BC, Celtic culture had spread rapidly through Europe and now included the region of modern-day France in its heartlands. United by shared spiritual practices with a revered role for the Druid priest, communities were likely led by warrior kings, but with enough social specialization to allow for an intellectual class which included poets and legal figures. The European continent was again to be swept up in a revolutionary development with the advent of the Iron Age. Emerging first in the Aegean region and rich civilizations of the Greek world by around 1000 BC, it soon spread into the rest of Europe. First through trade networks, then by the replication of the technology within communities. By 800 BC, and accompanying the new Hallstatt culture, iron was integrated into Celtic life. As well as allowing for a revolution in tool design, which increased efficiency of tasks from agriculture to home building, it also dramatically altered military dynamics. While bronze had been a step change from the tin and stone of before, it was still not particularly durable, and blades were prone to bending and degrading. Iron, however, was a stronger metal. Instead of being cast in molds as with bronze, these new blades could be hammered out in furnaces. What emerged was a new baseline weapon which was much more deadly and would soon be integrated into every level of Celt warrior culture. During the late Iron Age in the region of modern-day France, and the first colonists by sea were to arrive. The mighty Greeks and Phoenicians took interest in southern coastal areas as they expanded their Mediterranean trading empire. Here, they founded cities such as modern-day Marseille around 600 BC, which would go on to become a crucial hub for the modern nation. This thrust them into conflicts with local Celtic groups, but also brought advanced technology and Hellenic culture into the region. While we lack historical records for the intervening period until the emergence of Roman written records, what can be said is the Celtic groups had become strong and were highly developed. A culturally rich and connected people, the Celts of Gaul had extensive trade networks south into Iberia, north into Britain, and east into the Germanic heartlands. They were also a fearsome military force, employing devastating use of a slashing longsword, which would soon prove its worth against more established forces in the region. A great demonstration of Celtic power in this period is the campaigns conducted by legendary chief Brennus. He was a chieftain from the Seine region of modern-day France who commanded a force of his Sinoan people. At this point, much of what would later be northern Italy was controlled by Celts. This territory formed a region known in the period as Cisalpine Gaul. By 400 BC, Brennus already had a presence in the Alpine and Adriatic north, but began a new campaign pushing southward into central Italy around 391 BC. This involved a siege of the city of Clusium before marching on towards the capital of Rome. Here, around 11 miles north of the city, they faced Roman troops at the Battle of Allia. The Celts had possibly around 50,000 men, with Rome around the same level or a little greater. The advance of Brennus's forces had taken Rome by surprise, though, so it seems to have been a chaotically mustered force with a large contingent on poorly trained militia. The main source for the battle, Livy, described the unfolding events. Roman forces had extended their wings of the battle line to try and avoid a flanking maneuver. They also placed reservists on a hill above the battle. Chief Brennus, though, was wary that this hill force would try and attack the Gaul rear while he was engaged with the main forces on the plains. As a result, he sent his forces first to this hill position. This move took the Romans by surprise, and their left wing proceeded to flee. A general rout soon erupted, with the Celt forces slaughtering fleeing Roman soldiers en masse. Many were also killed as they attempted to swim across the river to safety by Celt javelin or dragged down by the weight of their armor. The victory at Allia is said to have even taken Brennus and his men by surprise with its swiftness and total nature. After reported desecration of the dead and taking of heads, his forces then proceeded on to Rome. Here they found a city vulnerable and deprived of its main defensive force, which had just been defeated by Brennus in battle. It's said the fighting-age men of all social ranks retreated to hold Capitoline Hill above the city, with those unable remaining. Brennus's men entered and proceeded to sack Rome, with the defenders on the hill above forced to watch over its destruction. Though the invaders were repelled after a period of months, it was a devastating blow for the Republic. It would mark only one of 3 times the city was sacked, and the state would face such humiliation, with the others being nearly 800 years later in the 5th century AD by the Goths and Vandals in the twilight years of the Empire. The campaigns of Brennus would be the high-water mark of Celtic power in Gaul. They are also a striking example of the precarious position of Rome in its early days as a republic. However, this situation would change over the following century, with key battles fought at Sentinum in 295 BC and finally Telamon in 225 BC, pushing the Gauls out of northern Italy and establishing a permanent Roman presence there. This would also be the precursor to a further Roman push into the territory of modern-day France itself, which would initially occur gradually over the next period. First, with a Roman incursion and annexation of the province region, as punishment for Gaul tribes allying with Hannibal in his war with Rome. It would then gather pace and culminate in the total subjugation of Gaul by Julius Caesar in 51 BC, with the completion of his Gallic campaign. This was a key turning point and marked the end of a long period of full autonomy for the people who had lived there. It would also begin the process of Romanization and dilution of Celtic culture, another key element in the future nation of France. From the rich artistry and nomadic cultures of the Mesolithic period, through the agricultural revolution of the Neolithic, and on to the Proto-Celtic population of the region, we can see a unique development trajectory, a rich and ancient history that culminated with a Celtic population living across the majority of the modern region of France, a collection of tribes so powerful at one time that they could threaten the very heart of the Roman Republic and maintain the initiative for centuries. However, the changing tides brought reduced influence, and eventually subjugation by a Roman Empire gaining in power, followed by an influx of Germanic settlement. These were the conditions which set the stage for the next period of development of the foundations of the modern nation of France.